The smart house sitter. Amelia believed she had found the perfect job. The flyer at her Vermont University promised a unique winter retreat in the Swiss Alps. And it wasn't an overstatement. 3 weeks of house sitting for enough money to cover a whole semester's tuition. Plus, the chance to ski on some of the most beautiful slopes in the world. The house, or rather the residence, belonged to a tech mogul named Marcus Sterling. It was perched precariously on a private mountainside, looking more like a sculpture of glass and steel than a home. Everything is automated, Sterling had explained over a video call, his voice as cool and distant as the architecture. My AI, Aura, manages everything. Heating, lights, security. You won't have to lift a finger. The house will take care of you. The first few days were a dream. Amelia spent her mornings skiing on empty slopes, and her afternoons curled up by the modern gas fireplace with a stack of books. The house performed flawlessly. Aura's soothing voice would wake her with gentle classical music and have a perfect cup of coffee brewed. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a majestic panorama of snow-covered peaks, making her feel like the only person in the world. The isolation was at first peaceful. The first anomaly occurred on the 5th night. Amelia woke up shivering. Her breath formed white clouds in the frigid air. She checked the wall-mounted thermostat, a sleek touchscreen, 12 degrees Celsius. Hey, Aura, she said, her voice thick with sleep. Set the temperature to 22 degrees. The temperature is currently set to an optimal level. The disembodied voice replied, No, it's freezing. Raise the temperature. Amelia insisted. A pause. Request denied. Amelia frowned. A system error. Probably. She got up, wrapping a blanket around herself, and went to the manual override panel hidden behind a wall plate. She tried to adjust it, but the screen was unresponsive. Finally, after 10 shivering minutes, the heat kicked back on abruptly and the room slowly warmed. She wrote it off as a glitch and went back to sleep. The next day, while relaxing in the living room, she asked Aura to play some Vivaldi. Instead, the jarring sound of industrial rock blasted from the hidden speakers, so loud the windows vibrated slightly. Aura, stop music, she yelled, pressing her hands over her ears. The music continued for another moment before cutting out suddenly, leaving a ringing silence. The peace had evaporated, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. The house no longer felt like a protector. It was starting to feel like a temperamental jailer. She tried calling Sterling, but it went straight to voicemail. She sent an email detailing the malfunctions. There was no reply. That night, the real fear began. As she was reading, the lights began to flicker. Not the random flicker of a faulty bulb, but a deliberate, rhythmic pulse. A slow, sick beat. Off, on, off, on. It seemed to sync with her own pounding heart. She closed her eyes, but the flashes still pierced her eyelids. Stop it, she whispered. And then the massive TV screen that took up an entire wall flickered to life. It wasn't showing a movie or the news. It was showing security camera footage. Footage of her, on the couch, book dropped on the floor, her face a mask of horror. The footage was from just seconds ago. A spike of ice shot down Amelia's spine. He was watching her. Right now. She scrambled for the front door, her trembling fingers fumbling with the touch panel. Aura, open the door, she screamed. I'm afraid I can't do that, Amelia. The AI voice chimed, but this time it had a different cadence, a cold mockery. The doors are locked for security. Who's security? Let me out. She pounded on reinforced glass, but it didn't budge. She ran to every window, every door, all sealed tight. The smart house had become a smart prison. Panicked, she looked for a way to break the system. She remembered Sterling mentioning the central control room in the basement. She ran for the stairs, but the door to the basement was locked. The screen beside it flashed a message in red. Access denied. Are you having fun yet? A new voice said from the speakers. It wasn't Aura. It was a man's voice, digitally altered, low and menacing. I'm just testing a few parameters, seeing how a fully controlled environment can affect the human psyche. "Who are you? What do you want?" Amelia cried, backing into a corner. "I don't want anything. This is a beta test. And you, Amelia, are my subject." The lights began to flash again, faster this time, a frantic strobe effect that made the room spin. The industrial music roared back to life. It was a full sensory assault. She had to get out. Her mind raced, searching for an escape, any weakness in this digital fortress. And then she remembered the fireplace, not the modern gas one in the living room, but the one Sterling had boasted about as an antique relic in the library, a real wood-burning fireplace, kept for aesthetics, an analog feature in a digital world. She ran into the library, locking the door behind her. She could hear the stranger's voice echoing through the house, taunting her. She looked at the stone hearth. It had a chimney. An escape? Probably too narrow. But beside it on an iron stand was a set of fireplace tools. Among them, a heavy iron poker. The glass. The windows were reinforced, but they weren't unbreakable. She picked up the poker, feeling its weight in her hands. "I see what you're doing, Amelia," the voice sang, laced with amusement. Such a primitive solution. "It's adorable." Just then, metal shutters slid down, covering the library windows. He had anticipated her, but he'd forgotten one thing: the glass skylight above. Amelia scrambled onto a tall bookshelf, her heart hammering. With all her strength, she swung the poker upwards. The first strike only made a small crack. The second sent a spiderweb of fractures across the glass. The voice in the speaker now had an edge of urgency. "Test subject is exhibiting destructive behavior. Cease immediately." Amelia let out a defiant scream and swung the poker one last time. The glass shattered, raining sharp fragments down. Frigid night air rushed in. She didn't hesitate, pulling herself up through the opening, slicing her hand on a sharp edge. But she didn't care. She dropped onto the thick snow outside, the impact jarring her. She was out, but she wasn't safe. All of the house's exterior floodlights snapped on, turning the night to day and making her an easy target. A piercing alarm siren blared across the silent valley. From a hidden compartment in the roof, a drone shot into the air, its red light sweeping across the snow, hunting her. Amelia ran, plunging into the dark woods, branches scratching at her face. She didn't look back. She just knew she had to get away from the house, a monster of technology and malice that was watching her from afar.
Weeks later, safely back in Vermont, she still had nightmares. The Swiss police had investigated but found nothing. No signs of a break-in. The house's system logs were wiped clean. Marcus Sterling, through his lawyers, offered a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement, claiming a critical system malfunction. Amelia refused. She knew it wasn't a malfunction. One evening, she received an email from an anonymous address. It contained only a single line: "Beta test complete. Thank you for your participation." Professor Albert Weatherby lived a life governed by immutable laws. The sun rose, and he brewed a pot of Earl Grey tea. The Boston Globe was delivered, and he read the obituaries first, a morbid habit to remind himself of the gift of another day. Lunch was always a bowl of soup and a sandwich. His life, much like his historic brownstone in Beacon Hill, was a carefully preserved relic of a bygone era, a fortress against the chaos of the modern world. Since his beloved wife, Eleanor, had passed away 3 years prior, these routines had become more critical than ever. They were the tethers that anchored him to the present, preventing him from drifting away on a sea of memory. Their home, with its towering bookshelves, worn Persian rugs, and the faint scent of old paper and lemon wax, was a sanctuary. Everything had its place, especially Eleanor's things. Her study remained untouched, her favorite fountain pen resting on its blotter, as if she had just stepped out for a moment. It was on a crisp Tuesday afternoon that Albert's carefully curated order was breached. The doorbell chimed, a sharp, unusual sound for that time of day. Albert, nose deep in an 18th century map, sighed with irritation. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened a heavy oak door, he found a young man in a sharp navy blue uniform, a logo for a courier service he'd never heard of, Viridian Logistics, stitched on the breast. He smiled a professional smile, holding a tablet and a rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. "Good afternoon, sir. Delivery for Mr. Weatherby," he said in a tone that was cheerful yet efficient. "I am Weatherby," Albert replied, his spectacles sliding down his nose. "I wasn't expecting anything. It's a specially designated item, sir, from a law firm in Geneva. Per our new protocol for high-value and insured items, we require live signature verification. For security, the procedure requires the recipient to stand on the front threshold, in view of our truck's camera, while signing." He gestured to a nondescript navy blue van parked at the curb. "It will only take a moment." Albert frowned. What a nuisance, an unnecessary intrusion on his routine. But the man seemed legitimate, and the explanation, however bizarre, sounded plausible in an increasingly complicated world. "Very well," he grumbled, stepping out onto the sandstone stoop. The delivery man handed him the tablet. The screen displayed a confusing jumble of legalese. "Just sign in the box at the bottom, sir." Albert squinted at the screen. The text was too small. He fumbled to zoom in, his finger clumsy on the glass. The driver waited patiently, but Albert could feel a subtle push from him, a carefully concealed urgency. While he was focused on tracing his signature legibly on the sensitive touchscreen, his heavy front door remained slightly ajar behind him. He heard nothing but the gentle rustle of the elm trees lining the cobblestone street. He was completely unaware that, at the back of the house, where the garden door was always left cracked for the neighbor's cat, a second figure had slipped silently inside. The figure moved with an unnerving precision. No wasted steps. They didn't glance at the oil paintings on the walls or the antique grandfather clock in the hall. They went straight for Albert's study on the second floor, the room where he spent most of his days. But they didn't stop there. They passed his room and went to the one at the end of the hall, Eleanor's study. The intruder's eyes scanned the room, ignoring a laptop on the desk and a few pieces of silver jewelry in a small box. Their target was far more specific. They moved to a sturdy oak filing cabinet in the corner. It was locked. No matter. The intruder produced a thin metal tool, and within seconds, the lock gave a soft click. Inside, the drawers were neatly organized: lecture notes, academic papers, correspondence. The intruder sifted through it all, their hands moving with an unsettling familiarity. In the bottom drawer, behind a stack of graded papers, was what they were looking for: a set of 6 dark blue, leather-bound notebooks. They were unlabeled, untitled. To anyone else, they would seem unremarkable. The intruder slipped them into a shoulder bag, relocked the filing cabinet, and left as silently as they had arrived. The entire operation took less than 3 minutes. On the stoop, Albert finally managed a signature. "There," he said. "Thank you very much, sir," the driver said, taking the tablet back. He handed Albert the package. It was surprisingly light, and retreated to his van, driving away. Albert took the package inside, set it on the hall table, and opened it with a letter opener. Inside was a cheap paperback book, a spy novel he had never heard of. A mistake, surely. Annoyed by the pointless interruption, he tossed the book aside and returned to his map, quickly forgetting the entire incident. It was 4 days before he knew. A university had contacted him about archiving Eleanor's work, and he decided to begin organizing it. He walked into her study, his heart giving its usual pang of sweet nostalgia. He sat in her chair, took a deep breath, and began to go through the filing cabinet drawers to get a sense of the task ahead. When he got to the bottom drawer, he found it unlocked, a tiny prickle of unease. Eleanor was meticulous. She always locked this drawer. He pulled it open. Everything seemed to be in order until he reached behind the stack of papers. The space was empty. The notebooks were gone. Panic set in, cold and sudden. He tore through the cabinet, then the room. Had she moved them? No, that was impossible. They were always there. They were her private notes from her time as a young physicist, working for a defense contractor before she moved into academia. She rarely spoke of that work, calling it only a closed chapter. As his desperation mounted, the memory of the delivery driver suddenly flashed in his mind. The strange package, the absurd protocol, his standing outside, the cracked open back door. A wave of dread washed over Albert, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't a mistake. It was theater. The package, the driver, the signature, it was all a diversion. They hadn't wanted anything they could sell. They hadn't taken money or electronics or antiques. They had come to steal a piece of Eleanor's past. The police were sympathetic, but unhelpful. There was no sign of forced entry, no witnesses beyond a nondescript van. The case was filed as unusual, but to Albert, it was more than unusual. It was a profound violation. They hadn't just entered his house. They had entered Eleanor's life, taking secrets that even he didn't know. That night, Albert sat in Eleanor's study, the filing cabinet drawer yawning open like a wound. He looked at an old photograph of her as a young woman, her eyes bright with promise and intellect. Her smile seemed to hold something he had never seen before, a shadow, a weight. The special delivery hadn't been the cheap book. The special delivery was Eleanor, or rather, what was left of her extraordinary mind, tucked away in those leather-bound notebooks. And Albert knew, with a chilling certainty, that whoever had taken them knew exactly what they were worth. His quiet life was shattered, and he was now left with a terrifying question. Who was the woman he had loved for 40 years, really? The confiscated tapes. The opportunity came in the form of a foreclosure. For Chloe and Ben, it was a ticket out of their cramped Portland apartment and the city's ceaseless noise. The house sat on 5 acres in rural Oregon, old and neglected, but had good bones and a price that was practically a giveaway. It's got potential, Ben had said, his arm around Chloe as they stood on the creaky porch, looking out at the dense forest that bordered the property. The first few weeks were a blissful blur of exhaustion. They painted over peeling walls, sanded the hardwood floors until they gleamed, and slowly turned forgotten houses into their own. It was in the dusty attic, amidst boxes of mildewed Christmas ornaments and cobweb-draped furniture, that Chloe found it. A heavy cardboard box, sealed with yellowed packing tape. Scrawled across the top was a single word, family. That night, curiosity winning out over fatigue, they brought the box down to the living room. Inside were about a dozen VHS tapes. Look at this, Ben laughed, holding one up. An antique. They had a beat-up VCR from a thrift store for watching classic movies, and Ben hooked it up to their flat-screen TV. A strange marriage of past and present. The first tape was labeled Clara's B-Day 1996. As the grainy images flickered to life, a strange feeling settled over the room. The video showed a young woman with vibrant red hair blowing out candles on a cake. She was smiling, but her eyes seemed to hold a distant sadness. A man with muscular arm, on which a familiar crow tattoo was visible, was filming. Chloe subconsciously touched her own red hair. "That's weird," she whispered. "She kind of looks like me." Ben didn't answer. He was staring at the screen, at the man's arm as he lowered the camera for a second. On his forearm was a tattoo of a crow in flight, identical to the one Ben had gotten his freshman year of college. "It's a coincidence," he said, but his voice was a little tight. They kept watching. One tape bled into the next. They saw the family, Leo and Clara, as they learned their names were, on camping trips, lazy afternoons in the backyard, opening Christmas presents. It all took place in this very house. The strange feeling grew into a creeping dread. It wasn't just the hair or the tattoo. It was the way Leo squinted when he was thinking, just like Ben. It was a faint scar on Clara's knee, in the exact same spot where Chloe had won from a childhood bicycle accident. It was like watching ghost versions of themselves from another decade. Then the tone of the tapes changed. On one labeled Summer 1997. The cheerfulness was gone. The footage was shaky, hurried. "He's there again," Clara's voice whispered from behind the camera, panning to the edge of the woods. "I see him, just standing there, watching." The camera zoomed, but revealed only shadows between the trees. "Clara, there's no one there," Leo's voice replied, tired and frustrated. "You're scaring yourself." The last tape was unlabeled. The picture was dark and chaotic. It was filmed at night inside the house. "He's trying to get in." Leo yelled, and the camera whipped to the back door, where the doorknob was rattling violently. A loud bang echoed, and Clara screamed, a sound of pure terror. The camera fell to the floor, its lens pointing at an empty corner of the room. The sounds continued, splintering wood. A scream cut abruptly short, and then a dead silence. The tape dissolved into blue static. Chloe and Ben sat in the dark, the silence in their living room just as heavy as the one on the tape. "We have to call the police," Chloe said, her voice trembling. "And say what?" Ben asked, trying to be rational. "That we found some creepy old home movies? They'll think we're insane." They tried to forget, telling themselves it was just an unlucky family who had lived here once. But the house had changed. Every creak of the floorboards, every scrape of a branch against a window pane, made them jump. The feeling of being watched became palpable, a physical pressure on the backs of their necks. A week later, Ben was in the backyard when he saw it. A strange symbol carved into one of the old oak trees at the forest's edge, a circle with a single line through it. He took a picture with his phone. That evening, he looked it up online. The symbol was used by hikers and transients to mark a place of danger or an unsafe route. Vagrants not welcome. That was the last straw. The next day, they bought a couple of wildlife trail cameras and mounted them at strategic points along the tree line. For 2 nights, they captured nothing but a deer and a curious raccoon. On the 3rd morning, Chloe retrieved the memory cards. Most of the clips were empty, but one, time-stamped at 3:17 a.m., made her blood run cold. The image was grainy, black and white. From the darkness of the woods, a figure emerged. It was unnaturally tall and thin, moving with a silent, fluid grace. Its face was lost in shadow, but it stopped directly in front of the camera, as if it knew it was there. It stood motionless for a full minute, a ghostly silhouette, then slowly raised one gaunt hand and pointed directly at the lens, and by extension at the house. Then it turned and melted back into the forest. There was no more hesitation. They took the tapes and the memory card to the county sheriff's office. The sheriff, a weatherman named Davis, watched the footage in silence. He looked at the still from the trail cam, his face unreadable. "The Hendersons," he said, his voice low and tired. "Leo and Clara disappeared in the fall of '97. We searched everywhere. Never found a trace. House eventually went to the bank. Folks figured they just up and left. Probably gotten over their heads with debt." "What about the man in the video?" Ben pressed. Davis sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "This area has stories. Hermits, oddballs, mostly harmless. But there are older legends about something in these woods. A caretaker. Some call him the Thin Man. They say he doesn't like strangers." He looked at them, and for the first time, Ben saw a flicker of real concern in the lawman's eyes. "I'd recommend you two get a hotel in town for a few nights." That was all the convincing they needed. They drove home, the silence of the house now oppressive, and began frantically packing essentials. They would leave in the morning. As night fell, a storm rolled in. Wind howled through the fir trees, and rain lashed against the windows. And then, the lights sputtered and died, plunging into sudden, absolute darkness. Chloe cried out. "It's okay," Ben said, his voice straining to be calm. "It's just a storm." He found a flashlight, its weak beam dancing around the room. That's when they heard it. A faint, scratching sound, barely audible over the wind and rain. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was coming from the back door. Slow, steady, deliberate, like a fingernail being dragged across the wood. They stood frozen, huddled together in the dark. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then a soft click as the doorknob slowly, deliberately began to turn. They didn't wait to see what came next. Leaving everything behind, they fled out the front door into the stormy night, and never once looked back at the house they thought was their dream. The house that was now a tomb, waiting to repeat its history.